Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology. And as we look at the world of astrology today, given the current light of what we're in, we can see a lot of sort of changes afoot on the global stage as well as the local United States stage. An awful lot of turmoil, awful lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of vague quality about the whole thing that's going on. We see this sort of elusive quality in the world of the politics today. But we're going to have a great conversation. I've got Henry Seltzer on from Astrograph Software. He is the brainchild behind, actually Astrograph Software is his brainchild, I should say. And he is a remarkable, he was an engineer in the past and developed some of the most comprehensive and educational software you can imagine out there. It's called astrograph.com is the website. I encourage you to go there. He's on Facebook. He's on all the other outlets that you can imagine. And we're going to be discussing today the Jupiter-Uranus opposition, which we're currently leading up into right now. So it's a great pleasure to have you back on the air. Henry, I haven't talked to you in quite some time. Happy New Year. And give us your sense of the Jupiter-Uranus opposition.
Okay, well, Chris, yeah, thanks. Nice to be on with you again. We've had many nice experiences of interviews and spreading the word about astrology. I appreciate you and what you're up to.
Yeah, thank you.
And yeah, it's very exciting times. I mean, you don't need an astrologer to tell you that it's very exciting and unpredictable times right now.
You sure don't. There's certainly so much ambiguity out there and confusion.
And you know, it's interesting because a lot of astrologers have been talking about the Jupiter-Uranus opposition as being something that really begins to highlight Uranus more than we have seen in the past and the past year, and certainly that's true. You know, just as a brief intro, I would say that Jupiter with Uranus is all about, it's a very optimistic aspect because it's all about bringing out, the possibilities with Jupiter emphasizing and amplifying. It's bringing out the possibilities of Uranus in new ways. And we're seeing very inventive things coming down, like self-driving cars would be the perfect example. Not that that is a recent phenomenon that's been building up. Well, actually, what we can see from a slightly different perspective looking at the whole configuration of the year is that Uranus has been prominent ever since last spring. Mm-hmm. And the reason that is true is because of this new planet, Eris, that's beyond Pluto. And this takes a little bit of an intro because I've been working with Eris for a long time, and I'm just so startled by the accuracy of the results that it's really a very powerful factor in charts. Mm-hmm. And I wrote that book, The 10th Planet, that came out recently, a year and a half ago now, almost 2 years ago now, which has been very well received. And my starting point on that was I wonder, with these new designations, Pluto is a dwarf planet, and Pluto is still very active in charts. We use it in charts. We have not changed our approach, we astrologers. Pluto is still one of the important outer planets, along with Uranus and Neptune. Mm-hmm. And then we find Eris. Well, Eris is a dwarf planet, also named out of the pantheon of Greek gods and goddesses. And sure enough, it turns out to be very powerful in charts. And the question comes, how are we to regard this new entity, Eris? Should we regard it as a minor planet? Now, many astrologers, if you take a poll, you'll probably find 9 out of 10 would say, oh, it's like a minor planet, like an asteroid.
Right.
However, and this is perfectly logical, many might make that assumption, and it depends on empirical evidence, but my evidence shows that it's just as strong as anything in charts. I don't know if you'd want to call it, excuse me, one of the three outer planets, but you would call it a very powerful factor. I just call it a planet. I just say we have a new planet. It's considered, quote unquote, a dwarf planet, just like Pluto is, but that doesn't change the way we work with it in astrological terms, as long as we can identify the astrological archetype. So I'm going very fast here, but the basis of what my research has shown, and then I'll talk about how that actually really plays into the current events that we're seeing unfold in the world around us right now, that Eris is a feminine warrior or a spiritual warrior archetype for really taking a stand for what you most deeply believe. When I say feminine warrior, it's not about we want to beat everybody up and we want to be boss, like Mars might be more feisty like that. Mm-hmm. It's instead more of this comes from deep need. It's like a mother protecting her child. She'll do whatever it takes. It's like an act of nature where we see that a mother tiger will feed her young. She'll do whatever it takes, including murder. So it's a very, we would call it murder in a human frame. So it's a very powerful influence that does involve a sort of an activist stance. You see it very prominent in charts of people like William Blake. It was influential in many of the paradigm shifters when they came along, like Einstein, like Newton. Newton had Eris exact conjunction with the moon and very strong in his chart, and also very strong at the time that he announced his gravitational theory back in 1680, something like that. So this is very interesting research, and it's obviously more than an hour lecture, but just to talk about how this is in the background now. So Eris and Uranus are conjunct within 2 degrees, and this is true right through the whole year. Mm-hmm. It gets to be more than 2 degrees at some points in 2017, but it comes back to 2 degrees by the end of the year, and it has been less than 2 degrees ever since June when they were exact conjunction. So what we have right now, as you might call it, something like in the 60s we had Uranus and Pluto in conjunction, and that was looking back in 2020 hindsight, that was a big deal. That was like, oh my gosh, the revolutionary 60s.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's representative of sort of an organic diplomat in some ways? It's a softer approach rather than being the Mars-like warrior. It's more of a negotiator?
No, I don't think it's softer, Chris. Mm-hmm. I really don't. But I think it does come from a deep place, just like Pluto. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's cousin of Pluto. All these outer planets, including this new one, Eris, come from a deep place. That's a sort of a transpersonal realm, right, as opposed to the more personal planets, including Mars. So, warrior we associate with Mars, but spiritual warrior in this sense, it's not softer at all. I mean, it can be. I've seen examples of very rough stuff. It's a necessary act of violence that meets oppression with necessary violence. And a very good example in the current era is Standing Rock.
Okay, so it's more like civil disobedience in some ways.
Well, it may be civil and it may not be civil. I mean, the thing is, yes, in this case, yes, peaceful protest is certainly a good way to get things done because violence accentuates violence. And so if they were being very rough and violent and wrecking infrastructure, you can see how they would be more easily put down. But if they're being peaceful and they're just making their stand, but they are resistant. They are fighting fire with fire in a certain sense. I mean, they're getting attacked by the militia and the cops in certain ways, and they're just standing up to it. But you're right. In this particular case of Standing Rock, they have a very strong stand, coincidence of terms, stand.
Right, yeah.
And they are acting on it. They are very brave. They're out there in the midst of blizzards, keeping their camp intact because they know that their presence is what's keeping that pipeline from going through. And they feel like with the history of spills on pipelines, because that's not the first priority of the oil companies to make sure that human needs are safeguarded, So they feel like it's inevitable that the whole river there will be polluted, and they don't want to see that happen. They know that could be very severe on their environment there, and they're defending, they call it defending the water, which I think is beautiful. So this is a case of the people standing up against the corporations in a way that is really meaningful and puts all the issues right out in the open, doesn't it? About, what are we after? Corporate profits for this one little group? Or are we after the safety of the earth, the safety of the people of the earth, and not having these pollution disasters that are very common with pipelines? There's on the record, there's so many spills. There was even a spill in North Dakota in this past year, which is ironic because they're saying, "Oh, there's not going to be spills," but then there's one right there.
Yeah.
So
It's
anyway,
very, it's very timely and it's very topical right now, and it's indicative of this sort of the dance we're seeing between what's good for the public and what's good for the planet and what's good for the profit. So there's this whole discourse going on at the time.
Absolutely. And it's been a long time. I mean, this has been the issue in American politics for many, many years.
Yes.
But, the thing is, it's coming more out into the open. And really what we're seeing is a revival of the Uranus-Pluto square, of opening square, which is the first opening square since the 60s. And so this decade of 2010 to 2020 is actually a very important time of protest, of getting out in the open with it, of starting to see some heads roll like we saw in 68 at the Democratic Convention, because, this is a time of, early on, around 2010, astrologers were saying, well, this is the opening square of the Uranus-Pluto. We should see people in the streets. How come they're not people in the streets? And then we had the Arab Spring, and then we had the Occupy Wall Street movement and the 99%. It's becoming more and more evident that there's a populist revolution taking place. And then, like I'm saying, to try to go back to this year and that we're in now, and then, of course, last year, over the summer, we had Eris-Uranus very close. It was exact in June, and then it was within 2 degrees all the way through to the end of the year. And so my take on that was we have a very strong presence of Uranus. In other words, Eris is going to be magnifying that effect of Uranus, just like now, even more so with Jupiter opposite Uranus and Eris. In fact, Jupiter is at 22 degrees as we speak today of Libra. Eris is at 22 degrees of Aries with Uranus close by at 20. And then the full moon that happened earlier this
happened, it was at 22 degrees as well.
22. So we have a perfect grand cross.
And the sun as well, yeah.
Yeah, the sun and the moon opposite at 22 degrees. Even Saturn is at 22 degrees of Sag. Mm-hmm. And then, Jupiter at 22 degrees, 11 minutes of Libra. And then we have Eris at 22 and a half degrees. So a perfect grand cross in 22 degrees, including Eris. I have to talk about Eris, and it's actually so vital and important because, astrologers have been talking about how, oh, yes, we're seeing the revolutionary sense come out. We're seeing these new ideas come. We're seeing awakenings right now with the Trump victory, and that's all true. The Jupiter opposition in the past few weeks and months, a couple of months, has actually really stirred this up and made it even more so. But like I say, from June on, and so all summer, as the Trump what turned out to be a juggernaut was unwinding, you heard me saying over and over again, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Right.
And the thing is, why I was able to say that and make those very confident predictions, including I predicted Brexit, and I went on record with that because I could see that was hitting the Saturn in the chart of the UK, and I was all like, oh my gosh, they are going to vote for exit. And I went on record with that prediction in Great Britain, which it's more prominent there. But anyway, to get back to the summer, so these strange things would happen, and people say, "Oh, isn't that odd that Trump is like winning in some of these states?" Isn't that odd that Trump is doing so well, and then he gets caught in these inflammatory comments that were off record, and then the next thing that happens, and the next thing that happens, and the next thing. Well, I was saying all along, wait till you see the next thing. There's more surprises to come because I knew that Uranus was very much a part of that whole year, not just these last few weeks, but actually all the way through the summer and the fall of the campaign, to the point where it looked like it was a shoe-in for Hillary. And I said, there's more surprises. And then the FBI came out with, we're going to investigate Hillary some more. It's 11 days till the election, so we're just letting you know. So there's been just an ongoing series, including the fact that even after he won, there was question marks about the vote count. There was question marks about, was he qualified, Trump, and should the Electoral College be the filter that would keep him out of office? I mean, there's been so many, including right now today, there's an FBI investigation into whether there was contact between the Trump campaign and the Russians who were hacking.
Exactly, yeah. So do you think that Eris, in this case, stirs, though. Do you think Eris has more of an influence on Uranus, or that Uranus has more an influence on Eris, or are they
Well,
mutually receptive in that regard? I don't mean that.
mutually, yeah. If you think about it, it's very similar. It's just the same philosophy we'd use if you're looking at your Uranus-Pluto, the conjunction in the 60s.
Right.
We have a conjunction, so each one is influencing the other. So yes,
Exactly.
you could say very Iranian times. This whole last year and the election that we saw, we've never seen an American election with so many unconventional activities.
Unprecedented. Yeah, it's all about rebellion and turning over the old standard.
Well, the other thing is the awakening. Yeah, I think that's very important to recognize too. Thanks for saying that because, it's true that the Trump victory has been anomalous and people are worried about it and he's unpredictable. This whole next year is unpredictable as we can see there's strong Uranus. And actually, he's got Uranus very strong in his chart. So if you look at Trump's chart, he has the sun at 22 degrees of Gemini.
Yeah.
So this is the same thing. Saturn's exactly squaring his sun right now. He's embattled, His Saturn is 23 degrees of Cancer, which is the T-square to this opposition between Jupiter at 22 degrees of Libra and Eris at 22 degrees of
Exactly.
Aries.
Yeah, so he's really under the gun, and the scrutiny he's coming under is something he probably has never been used to before. One of the major concerns I heard Newt Gingrich last night speaking about his concerns for Trump, which was unusual, I thought, and he said that many of the people that he's hired for his cabinet are business leaders who come from a very fast-moving environment of business where decisions are made quite quickly and acted upon quite quickly. What may slow them down, what may ultimately be their Waterloo in this case, is the slow speed at which government moves. It may just have, every time he turns left or right, he's going to be sued for something and she'll just get caught into a quagmire.
Well, there certainly is the checks and balances, which is unforeseen. A good example is the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
The Republicans have just kind of boldly gone where angels fear to tread and said, let's just take it apart. Well, that's easier said than done because you can't pull out one thread from that, as Nancy Pelosi's been saying, without really taking the whole thing apart. And then you have millions of people without insurance. All of a sudden, the insurance companies are pulling out. It's a nightmare. So
it's a nightmare for the insurance agencies, and they will probably have the strongest voice in all of this because they have the most to lose. It's a bureaucratic nightmare if they try to untangle it. Nothing else.
Well, it is. So it's a tar baby for the Republicans, and we'll see what happens. But it is all very unpredictable. This is the most unpredictable president taking office in history. But it is a very powerful time, and it is a time, I started to say, the awakening, so there's a way that all of this coming out in the open. I mean, do we think that American corporations have too much influence in government? Well, why don't we put the CEO of a major oil company, who's part of the whole Russian oil enterprise as well, in as the Secretary of State? This has never been that blatant before.
It's so obvious. Yeah, it's just overly obvious.
So it is awakening people. Everybody's an activist, right? And so this brings out what you were asking about. How is it when you look at Uranus influencing Eris? So we see Eris coming to the fore in a new way. Well, this would be a time of revolutionary activism, a time of taking a stand. And what I always say, and I think it's a really important message for right now, is that in spite of people feeling disempowered, this is a time when if you can get in touch with what you really most deeply believe yourself, where do I stand? Do I, maybe I like the corporations. I think it's a great idea to have Republicans in the White House and get business back on track, or do I protest that? Do I feel like we have to have more of the 99% represented? We have to have more income inequality issues discussed and fought against, and we have to work to correct that situation. We have to rein the banks in, there has to be more regulation in certain areas. All of these things are becoming much more out in the open and prominent, and you see Hollywood stars taking a stand. There's really so much happening right now that is really saving us, because I think if you have that fear of, I don't know what's happening, I don't know, everything's out of control, my whole life is subject to these forces that I can't have anything to say about, these governmental forces. Well, you can, because if you have your own clear notion of this is what I most deeply believe and you're acting on it, then you're doing everything that you can do. And it's really kind of a saving grace, isn't it? Because then you can say, well, this is where I stand on this, and I'm making my protest known. I'm having conversations with people about it. I'm being an activist in whatever way is appropriate to my own life that I can do. And So I
Yeah,
say,
it certainly it heightens the dialogue. It brings the dialogue in maybe what once used to be secretive, perhaps far more visible because of the attention it's getting. So this makes it far more visible, and therefore it grabs people's attention. And I think it's going to be very surprising to many people when they realize what they have created here. Through the virtue of the election.
well, what they inadvertently create, absolutely.
Right.
And so then you have the situation, as I say, of bringing out that strong sense of, like I say, Eris as a feminine warrior energy, so or a spiritual warrior energy of, how can I be the best version of myself that I can? How can I take the deepest stand for what I most deeply believe? How can I be very strong in that? And that is the way to get past those fears and those uncertainties, because you just say, well, this is where I come down. This is where I come on this thing. So
Interesting. When you think about when you mentioned the feminine energy, wouldn't you have thought that that would have turned the tide towards the feminine candidate more so?
well, certainly there was that emphasis. I mean,
And she's seen as a warrior in some ways, or she was.
yes, absolutely. And what you have, yes, you have, the '60s were a time when civil rights was just beginning to come in, and then in this current era, this decade, we have the election of Barack Obama. The
Right.
first black president. We have the first that election on the Democratic side was a woman was the prominent. Hillary Clinton was the prominent woman candidate, and now you have, for the first time in history, a woman being a very serious candidate for the highest office. She didn't make it. There's a glass ceiling there. I mean, it's pretty bad to have a black man in the White House. It's even worse to have a woman in the White House. I mean, for Christ's sake, this is the friggin' White House, right? So, I mean, that's been a big
That's
part
the
of
public
the
sentiment. That's the
opposition.
public sentiment. Yeah,
Yeah, the public sentiment.
it could be
So,
very
I
well.
mean, not every part of the public. Of course, there's a lot of liberal sentiment. Let's have her in there.
Of course. Yeah.
And she did win the popular vote by 3 million votes. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said for her success in this campaign and her prominence in this campaign. And there's a lot to be said for the old guard coming in, or represented by Let's Vote for Trump. Let's be more the old boys and,
Old white men.
yeah, old white men.
Yeah.
Right?
But it
So
seems as if we.
it's very polarity. The thing about the polarity is also very evident in the fact that Saturn is such a big part of this whole
It is, yes.
configuration. Maybe you've noticed that.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting that I always saw the situation. I think that perhaps where we are now is a clarion call for exactly what you mentioned. It's sort of a clarion call for us to take up arms in some way, whether that be metaphorically or literally. I'm not espousing violence, but I'm saying it raises our attention and our collective consciousness to a point where we have to respond because it's so horrible to not to. It's so reprehensive not to respond in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I guess the point where you just have to.
Right, and that's the forcing function of what we would see in a tight fixation like this, the square, the Eris to Pluto and the Uranus to Pluto square certainly drives that kind of energy to the point where we have to respond. We really have no choice. It's like if the roof did not leak, we would not repair it. Well, the roof is leaking. We have to repair it.
That does bring up the Uranus Pluto, which is the decade.
Yeah.
I mean, this decade of the teens is the decade of the first opening square, as we were saying, between Uranus and Pluto after the Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the 60s. And we are seeing the 60s come roaring back in many ways. I mean, the hemlines going up and sexual mores being more openly discussed, the civil rights issues of our time with gay rights and also with women's rights and all those battles between the old guard and the new. And you do see Saturn in this configuration now, too, at 22 degrees right now exactly, also of Sag being trine. So Saturn is trine to Eris and Uranus. And you do see with, with Uranus and Saturn, you do see the polarity of the old guard and the new ideas coming in.
Mm-hmm. It always struck me that that after the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, that when the square came, we did see the revitalization of the racism and the segregation topic, as well as feminism. Both of those came to light through the embodiment of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And I was convinced that this was just the time for the feminist movement to sort of take up the charge. But the fact that Eris is a feminine warrior, as you say,
yes,
sort of makes sense to me because it does sort of really, it compels us to get out. And I think we are incredibly distracted. So this will force us to get out of our cell phones and our Facebook pages and get out on the streets perhaps and really take some charge of this and change the direction.
And it is kind of an organic, natural law kind of place that we're coming from. Not so much the idea of being lost in our screens, as you're saying, but coming along and looking at what are Earth issues. What do we really need? What do our children need for the future?
Yeah, and we are at a juncture where the decisions we make. So when you mention cabinet appointments and sort of the spin towards this more conservative climate denier approach, this would then, when we see the evidence clearly from the scientists that this is a real problem and we are not responding to it, in fact, we're going the opposite direction, that will get people's ire up, and that will be the point where we would tend to see this sort of revolutionary turn towards, what I would call civil disobedience, even if it isn't always civil.
Right, and it's a long haul. I mean, you can't just wave a magic wand and let Bernie Sanders become the president. It's going to be quite a struggle.
But I think what we saw in both Bernie Sanders and in Donald Trump, we saw this sort of this turn away from what we saw. It's the whole drain the swamp mentality, whether it's taken through the eyes of Bernie and his idea of overturning the situations, or if it's through Trump's idea. They both were on a similar parallel. Maybe the election may have been lost by people who defected to that through virtue of the fact, just the wanting to change.
They did capture that dissatisfaction with the status quo, the establishment.
Yeah, there's no question. We're talking today with Henry Seltzer. He's the brains behind Astrograph software, which I encourage you to look at. It's astrograph.com. Fabulous website, wonderful software, great services that are there, and you can get daily reports, you can get monthly reports, yearly reports, as well as very fascinating software. And I encourage you to do that. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in about 2 minutes, and we're going to continue our discussion about the revolutionary patterns that we're seeing in the greater world mundane stage setting right now in the horoscope. So hang in there, and we'll be right back.
And also, Chris, in the book is the 10th planet.
And the book and his Henry's book, Eris, the 10th Planet, is also available on his website, astrograph.com. We'll be right back in a few seconds. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com. Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color. Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. We're talking today with Henry Seltzer. He is the brains behind Astrograph software, which is an amazing astrological software. And we're talking today, he's also the author of Eris, the 10th planet, which he has just written over the last several years. And it's a fascinating study of what we would call a new planet. I guess in the world of astrology, there are, this planet just didn't arrive, but it's been there. But it's now being recognized as an archetype within the realm of our circle of the zodiac. And it's a fascinating story because we see Eris as the feminine warrior, and we see the feminine energy and the feminine warrior. Now, we knew the feminine energy was there. We've been seeing it on the horizon for some time. But the fact that this planet is there in conjunction with Uranus, the planet that brings about revolution, innovation, and rebellion, is telling of where we are as we turn this tide right now. So it's interesting to see this happening right now. Of course, we're in the middle of what we call a cardinal cross, and we're going to have several of them coming up over the next few months or so. Right now, we have Jupiter at 22 degrees. We've got Uranus at 20 degrees. We've got Pluto at 17 degrees, and we have the Sun today at 22 degrees as well. And we had a full moon where the full moon was at 22 degrees. So we had that cardinal energy being triggered. Now, when we look at that, Henry, and we look at what was happening in the world stage, we can see a direct parallel. And I'm curious, what do you see as we go through these cabinet hearings, and we see these march towards the inauguration and all the news hitting the stands and the scandals coming out about Russia and everything? I'm curious, and now the FBI is going to be under investigation. James Comey's going under investigation. Do you think these are harbingers of a turn towards a correction of sorts?
Well, it's amazing with the Uranus-Pluto because a lot of people have been confused. The most recent exact hit was in 2015, and it was 2012, I think, was the first exact hit. There were 7 exact hits, and so people are kind of like confused. Well, if the exact hits of Uranus and Pluto were in the past, what are we seeing in the rest of this decade? But if you think about it, the conjunction of the 60s was right in the middle of the 60s, and we certainly saw much activity after, 68 was the Chicago Convention, which I liken to this time because that was also when Saturn was very involved from the end of 66 onward in that Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the 60s. And now that we see Saturn as a part of this configuration, at least short term, it does come back by the end of the year also. So Saturn is involved really for all of 2017, not from a square position, but from a trine to Uranus.
Yes.
And what we're seeing really, I think, is the playing out of some of these establishment versus anti-establishment forces that were in motion back in the 60s. And there we had more the seed idea as appropriate to the conjunction. And now we are seeing the playing out of that. Is it viable? The way the hippies were almost like a secondary factor in the existing economy, which was very straight at the time. And they've been more and more. When they say they, I mean the whole New Age movement, the New Thought movement, the Transformation Thought movement has been more and more part of our culture, almost like an underground stream, which is now finally surfacing. So what we're seeing in the last half of this decade is very, very important, and is the working out. It's the the aftermath or the resolution phase of this very powerful, very important Uranus-Pluto conjunction, which stays within orb. If you look at the way Rick Tarnas talks about these things, he sees the period of Uranus and Pluto as being very clearly right up until the end of this decade, 2020. And what do we have in 2020? Well, in 2020, we have, first time we have Saturn and Jupiter coming into an air sign and staying in air signs. We have, it was an air sign once in the past, but that was like an anomaly out of the Earth signs. Now it's going to be an air. And we see also the Pluto return in the United States chart. And we see that Saturn and Pluto Saturn and Jupiter as they come together is right in the same framework as Pluto.
So we're going to have Pluto, Saturn, the Sun, and Jupiter all in Capricorn and right around 2020. Matter of fact, if we run the charts today in January 12th, 2020, we're going to see them all lined up in Capricorn, which really does I think, bode for the total reconstruction of some sort. We've always thought of Pluto as the great reconstructor. I think that the triggers that set that off come through the presence of Saturn and Jupiter together with Pluto in that regard.
Yeah, so getting back to the present events, I think we're seeing the tip of the iceberg of protest, contention between the establishment wanting to keep business as usual, especially business,
Exactly,
profits, and the environment being sidelined, and then we see the protest against that makes the environment very important. This is the crucial time, according to the scientists, according to the climate scientists, this is a crucial time in stopping the advance of global warming. So, if we don't do it now, we're just not going to do it.
We won't have another chance. There's no other chances. We can't really repair this without this. Exactly. Many people. One of the things that's disconcerting about the Secretary of State, who is being the proposed President-elect Secretary of State choice, is the fact that he thinks that these problems can be engineered to be corrected by engineering, and I don't think we can correct the whole planet with engineering.
Well, it's going to be hard, yeah.
And so
there's quite a battle of all kinds. There's a battle there to put the energies instead of into bombs and domination and trying to dominate third world countries, and create situations where the resources that they have under their control go in our direction, which has been the imperial move in the past, just like we saw in the 60s. That was when the Vietnam War was raging and there was issues of what that war was about. We see the same kind of wars happening now and protests against those wars, which has been kind of muted, I think, but maybe it will be accelerating.
Well, I think the difference between the Vietnam War and what we were witnessing now is the very, very presence of the draft. If we had had a draft in this war, I think this war would have ended far sooner.
Yeah, there's other differences that I see. I think there's also more control of the media now than there was back then.
That's true too, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, there's a way that, yes, protest has been stifled in a certain way. It hasn't been. People have been distracted with their screens, as you commented earlier.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, the kind of social or civil disobedience that can come through Facebook is not the same as feet on the ground, boots on the ground, so to speak, using that military metaphor. Because if people do march on Washington as they're planning the Women's March next week, we will see a large outpouring of real, true, active civil disobedience once again. This is where things really get done because attention will be drawn to that.
Yeah, it's just a very crucial time. It's a time if we don't stand up and be counted, we're missing the boat. This is like the moment of history, these next 4 years leading up to the 2020 election. And
it will slip. Our opportunities for change will slip away from us if we don't, because the mechanism of what could be put in place would then become domineering and overpowering. That's why, in many ways, I believe that the pendulum has swung as far as it has this time, because it is a forcing function. It drives our attention to get angry. I talk everyone who I happen to bump into, no matter where they may be, are very, very disheartened and concerned about what's going on. And so this elevates our attention to the point where we have to take action, or else we are going to be, we have no choice. So this is a forcing function, which is it's a bitter pill to swallow. I certainly agree, but I think that's the only way. Otherwise we become apathetic.
Absolutely. And a Hillary Clinton victory, which everybody was on the liberal side was hoping for, because it would have been a milder situation in Washington, that would have been more apathy.
It would have been more apathy, exactly. People would have just said, okay, it's just another 4 more years of the same thing, and nothing would have happened. But because we've had this dramatic departure, it's gotten our attention, and it's pumped the whole thing up.
There was an activist back in the 60s, I can't remember his name now, but he was absolutely in a beautiful place, spiritual place. And I remember watching him speak, and I remember hearing him say, Vietnam is such a jewel. And what he meant by that was at that time, the stirring point of activism. That was at that time what made people come out in the streets and really begin to protest against being railroaded and against the corporate takeover, which we've seen only accelerate in the last 50 years.
Which, which really supports the whole astrological concept that we all share, is that progress only happens when there's tension and despair. That's the only time progress happens, is when there's a need for it. If life is rosy and your chart is full of trines, nobody has that, but if you had nothing but trines in your chart or an easy aspect, you'd sit around the house and get nothing done. But when there is tension, then the squares, that architectural 90-degree angle, then we see action. Then we see people rising up because they do it out of necessity. This is what compels the forward motion of history through this helios that we have, this timely helios. So we do see things repeating, and this is a repetition of what we saw back then. And it is that same difficult aspect that forces us to act.
It is the way things seem to work.
Mm-hmm. I mean, much as we may like to think that life would be wonderful, and and it's kind of funny because we'd love to use the term "La La Land," which just, of course, won a lot of awards, but that
right, which is beautiful because it distracts from all this.
Exactly, just the way the Uranus-Saturn square distracted while we were in the midst of that all through this election cycle. I always thought that it was when I saw Donald Trump walk out onto the Republican National Convention in a bank of fog, I said, "Wow, that is Neptune if ever I saw it." And then we had Hillary being the sort of.
Oh, so you were talking about the Neptune-Saturn square? Yeah, that's another interesting.
And then we see Hillary as the stern school teacher, so to speak, sort of chastising us. That to me was very Saturnian. So we sort of had a gunfight at the OK Corral between Neptune and Saturn over, and obviously Neptune won.
Neptune has been very prominent. It was recently also with the recent new moons, and I think the Neptune side of things and the Neptune-Saturn square that we were seeing, that's a little bit beyond now. We do see that fake news has become like a really important factor in this whole situation.
Yeah, it's classic. It's classic archetypal Neptunian times that we're seeing, and there's this. I think that it's indicative by the fact that we're all distracted, we're all lost in La La Land. I mean, La La Land is the word we used to use when I was a kid about being lost, and it's just won all these Golden Globe awards, and it's the most appropriate name for our times. We are in some ways living in La La Land because of our distractibility.
Well, everything is kind of created it for us, isn't it? I mean, we get to see something on the internet and start repeating it, and then nobody ever bothers to know whether it's true or not. It's just all.
Yeah, and it can start anywhere. All it takes is the ability to know how to use Photoshop and be able to put together something that looks credible. And there's no arbiter, there's no overarching governing body that can verify or justify any of the action that we're seeing or any of the news that we're seeing. So we really are truly living in a very Neptunian time. And
we never know what's going to happen. I mean, when Trump said it wasn't the Russians that hacked, that could have easily been the truth. We don't know really what's going on. I mean, was it the Russians? Was it not the Russians? Is he in league with the Russians? Is he not in league with the Russians? Is he got some good ideas? Has he got some nothing but terrible ideas? I mean, we really don't know what's happening.
So when confusion reigns supreme, that is a problem, because then nothing is believable, which then I think sets the bar for a recalibration of sorts. And that's what I think the recalibration will probably come in 2020 when we have that conjunction of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter together. That would be, I would think, sort of the grand tearing down of the empire, so to speak.
Just remember, though, you can't wait for 2020. I mean, this is time now.
Yeah,
it's going to have to be 4 years of solid work to get to 2020 to be in a position to actually have some choice.
Right. So the thing that the most important thing that has to be mentioned, I think, is the ability to be active. As you say, we've got to be resist in some way. We have to. If you feel that is what your cause is, if you're happy the way things are, then that's fine. But if you feel this is a cause that needs to be inflamed, then you need to be active in that regard, I think.
Very much so. And I think that's what everybody's feeling, on their inner level. And isn't it interesting that we have such prominent Uranus right now?
Yeah.
Which I believe is very clear. And I articulate this thesis in my book, The 10th Planet, that, really all the paradigm shifters, all the feminists, they couldn't find people that were making their own stand against establishment ideas or just normal currency of ideas for their own way of looking at things that didn't have prominent Uranus. It's really interesting.
So, what do you see a very common link there in their personal charts as to where they are, the Uranus is?
Well, no, Uranus is all different. I mean, sometimes Gloria Steinem had Uranus conjunct the Sun, and you see that with feminists. But you sometimes just see a lot of strong aspects to the personal planets, which is another way of seeing strong Uranus in the chart.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, I've got it square my natal moon in my chart, and my natal moon is in my 10th house. So it seems like it sort of fits there by, having a radio show and a television show that talks about these topics is probably in line with that. So it's kind of interesting.
Absolutely. See that? It magnifies what it touches
Hmm.
anytime in the natal chart. So that would make your moon more prominent, and that is relating to the public, and it is in the 10th house.
Yeah, yeah, and and my natal moon is conjunct my natal Uranus as well. So they're both,
Oh, very good.
yeah, they're both in that sort of in the zone. But the
Public speaker about astrology, Uranus.
yeah, 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 right.
House as a career move, and then seeing that as a sole purpose,
Right.
which is yours.
Yeah, it goes back to the relationship. It's interesting because when we look at this sort of the Jupiter Uranus opposition, I think that Jupiter we know inflates or amplifies that which it touches or opposes. I think very actively, and so we see this sort of heightened awareness of the presence of Jupiter in because right now, like today, they're directly opposing each other. Just maybe a few minutes off. Yeah, just a few minutes off. But for the most
And
part,
triggered by the full moon.
and triggered by the full moon, exactly. There is this, and this is why we see. I think that, I mean, this might give us an indication of where things might go. And like you said earlier, wait until there's more surprises to come. We may be in for a really jolting, surprising time coming forward, especially as Mars perhaps gets into that realm, which won't be very far off.
That's right. I forget when Mars gets to Aries, but it's not very long from
No,
now.
it's not. It's around the beginning of March, I believe. It's at 18 Pisces today, so it's going to take, another 5, 6 weeks to get there. But it'll
Hmm.
be coming through that area, and it'll be triggering, when Mars conjunct Jupiter, Mars conjunct Uranus, opposing Jupiter, that should be who knows what'll happen there. There may be something that might be quite revolutionary in that regard.
Well, this whole year has got a lot of the thing I've been talking about mostly is this Uranus-Eris conjunction, which comes back in March,
Hmm.
and then it's within 2 degrees for most of the rest of the year. So, we're seeing another year of what we saw last year in a different way, obviously, but we're seeing again, as you just indicated, unexpected events, surprising, startling events, awakenings, time of real getting into what we need to get into in order to activate the transformation in our own lives that is taking place with this Uranus-Pluto square that's part of the decade that we're in.
Yeah, and it's the events and the prospect of what could happen with events that are the forcing functions. It's kind of like when we see these people get appointed to cabinet positions, and we see other things like this happening. These are prods. These are like it's like taking a stick to a puppy in a cage and getting the puppy angry. This is how you stir a sleeping giant. This is. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is what gets people, that gets their ire up, understandably so and rightfully so, perhaps.
Well, and necessarily so. It's
Necessarily so, yeah.
the only thing that's going to get us through.
Yeah. And so when we look forward onto this and we see these interesting kinds and the cardinality of it all, obviously cardinal planets and signs are those that initiate and get things moving. This is the beginning of a whole new way forward. So in many ways, we have turned the corner. If you think about it, even just historically, we have turned a corner, and they did change course. We have changed course. We're no longer a liberal, democratic controlled, or well, never were controlled recently.
Not that liberal.
Not that liberal, right? But we were in a democratic mode, and now we're in a sharply different. I mean, just the dichotomy between the two administrations is just like it's black and white, no pun intended. But it is a harsh departure and a harsh turn. That will be the forcing function that gets people to stand up, I believe.
And don't you think it's interesting the Republicans are all about we have to repeal Obamacare. They just don't even want the guy's name involved with anything.
Right, I know, and they've been obstructionist in every way, and yet, it was interesting. I don't know if you follow the news closely, but Chuck Schumer, who's a senator out of New York, sent Mitch McConnell's own letter back to him about, how they had to vet all of the appointees that Obama had back in 2009, and
Right.
and so it's the same thing. So they're kind of getting a taste of their own medicine, perhaps, and this is going to be, and he's not, and Trump himself is not that kind to his own supposed party members. He's had a lot of contentious fallouts with the intelligence committee. So who knows? He's really overturning the whole system everywhere in some
He's a
way.
very Iranian guy. There's a lot of Uranus in his chart.
Yeah, no, he's of that era, and he was born on an eclipse. But he does have some rough times coming ahead. He's going to, I mean, on Inauguration Day, he's going to have Saturn opposing his Sun, and that's going to be a very difficult thing. And he's probably stepped into a much bigger quagmire than he had any idea he was looking at. I think he just thought he was going to walk in and wipe the slate clean and take care of everything. I think he's in for a very long, hard road.
I disagree with you about his naivete, though. I think he's quite a canny and foxy individual.
Yeah, he might very well be. I mean, I guess the reason I think that maybe it's perhaps his delivery and the way he speaks. He may be,
Yeah, but now he acts the fool, for
yeah.
sure.
And that, of course, and of course, using the small, shortened sentences gets to they're much easier to digest than, Hillary's long, rambling policy exchanges, which put people to sleep. He cut it down to the the Twitter feeds, and those things were what captured our attention and allowed us to, apparently buy the medicine or buy the snake oil that we got.
Well, it was certainly effective. I mean, he managed to get himself out there and in a prominent way, and his act was good enough to get people's attention and had that media savvy going on, right?
But I think that when you mentioned earlier surprises, there are more surprises in store. What would you envision? I mean, what would you? I mean, I think of it in terms of more investigations, a very slow gubernatorial process, a bureaucratic nightmare that just slows everything down even more so, perhaps, and perhaps a dissatisfaction by those who put him in office.
Well, we're seeing a lot of things that are potential trip ups. I mean, certainly one big looming one is this whole question of is he a foreign agent?
Right. Yeah. This is really disturbing.
If his campaign was in close contact with Russian government people, which there's an allegation, there's a current FBI investigation into that, then that becomes a question of, it's one thing if the Russians decided to come in on their own and hack into the DNC and make that information public and therefore, improve his chances, spoil Hillary's chances. But on the other hand, if he was collusion in that, then that becomes kind of actionable. I don't know.
Well, that's grounds for treason. That's grounds for treason, impeachment, and perhaps jail.
So.
Yeah, I mean that's what that would ultimately be. That,
but I think that was one of the things the founding fathers were looking into was would it be possible, and certainly they saw, even back in those days, there was the possibility of influence by a large foreign power, which there were many operating in the world at that time, and they were very small. And so they said that the Electoral College, for example, was the last chance before going ahead and electing this guy of saying, was he under the influence of a foreign power? So that was quite a legitimate challenge to, of course, that's gone past, but it was quite a legitimate challenge to his potential electability and being fit to serve in office. And I think that issue is going to haunt him somewhat. Then plus just the idea of climate change. I mean, he may be saying that climate change isn't important and we can undo the Paris Accords, but on the other hand, there's a lot of sentiment in this country that may very well block that and make it so that he can't actually go forward with that. I mean, there's legalities, there's ways that can be an issue of, you can't just trash the earth. It's not
right.
Okay.
And it's not to mention those countries and places of the world that are more affected by climate change than perhaps we are. This is not just our planet. This belongs to the entire world, and he may face resistance from them as well. So
it's a world issue that does not that affects every corner of this country and this planet. I mean, we're talking about the potential for a 6-foot rise in sea level. It would wipe out Florida cities. Florida real estate is going to be in big trouble. It could create a refugee problem of magnified, a huge size. I mean, we're seeing refugee problems right now. We're talking about millions. It changes everything. It makes it an unlivable planet, actually.
Right.
So if that goes through, it has to be fought in some way, or we're all history.
We're doomed. The only thing that disturbs me is perhaps the sequence of events as they unfold, because as we march closer to Inauguration Day, that puts him in the office. A lot of what has not been investigated thoroughly or thoroughly vetted at this point has yet to come. What does that happen? Does that come out after he's in and then he gets impeached, or does that turn the tables that way? Does he get impeached by his own party? I mean, we see the rumblings there.
I think we're not going to see impeachment because there's too much of a grip on power by these behind the scenes. We saw Bill Clinton, get in trouble over sexual scandals and get an actual impeachment trial, but that was because there was kind of a witch hunt going on to keep him and Hillary Clinton out of power on the part of these people that are actually really very happy to see the Republicans in power. So I don't think he's going to be. I don't think there's the possibility of an actual impeachment. I think it's going to be just a struggle between the people and the government. I think it's really becoming what they said in 2003 when George W. Bush invaded Iraq was that there were two major forces in action, and one was, the biggest superpower in the world, the United States, and its imperial ambitions, and then the other was the power of public opinion. And I think if everybody in this country was on the same page, they wouldn't be able to get away with anything because this is actually a democracy still,
Or at least the majority of the people. Maybe not everybody, but at least if we had a solid majority that was willing to fight back. And that, I think the long unwinding of history will point to that, because whatever is in motion now, whatever dissatisfaction there is with wage inequality, whatever satisfaction there is with gender rights, all those things are going to come to a boil, and they will, I think, force the situation further down the road.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, we've been talking today with Henry Seltzer. He is the man behind Astrograph software, which is a fascinating astrology software. I encourage you to look into it. Astrograph.com. It's a fabulous website, wonderful services there, a lot to get. And he's also the author of The 10th Planet, Eris, which is a fascinating player in our current world stage, especially when it comes into a direct conjunction with Uranus, the planet of revolution. And if Eris is the feminine warrior and Uranus is the revolutionary rebellion, we can see where that might go. And don't forget that history does not move. Actions do not happen unless there is hardship or some sort of tension. And we are seeing the tension rising. The pot is boiling. And perhaps this will bring us to that stage when we get down the road in 2020 when we see real tangible sort of reconstruction of some sorts. So
absolutely. And the iPhone app is very popular too.
It's called I have that. I have that on my phone. I use it all the time. It's a really cool app.
Its name is Time Passages.
Time Passages is the software, but you can get all that from astrograph.com. I encourage you to go there. The phone app, I can attest to, is fabulous. I use it all the time. Not only do you get to know where your current aspects are and your current transits are, but you also get a summation of your daily horoscope every day there. So it's really fascinating, well worth it, and a nice sort of thing. If you're a person who tracks astrology, as I do all the time, it's a nice adjunct to what I have, and it's very useful. So I encourage you to do that. So Henry, it's been great talking to you again. Thanks so much for coming on today, and thanks for all your insights. And hopefully we can. We're in for a long, strange ride, but that's something.
Absolutely, very well put.
We've been on that before, so perhaps we're going on it again. Anyway, my very best to you, and Happy New Year to you, and thanks so much for coming on today.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Yeah, bye-bye. You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.